Hey family, what's up? So I'm a philosopher first, a philosopher by training. I had undergraduate courses in philosophy of religion and religious studies, but my degrees both are in philosophy. And so this is going to be a philosophically inclined, oriented video, but I am going to engage some topics around the biblical literature. We've been talking a lot about that. I have been for a long time, and you are too. A lot of us are talking about that on this app, and we're talking a lot about presuppositions and biases, what we bring to the text when we evaluate the text, whether you can ever have objectivity or neutrality. And like many of you, I'm cynical that we can ever discover a pure objectivity. All observation is theory laden, as I've talked about in a few videos, that we're always going to bring our background beliefs and our theoretical orientation to any line of inquiry, whether that's observation of the natural world within the physical sciences, whether that's literary analysis or text criticism. We're always going to bring our background beliefs, our social status, our theoretical orientation to bear anytime we engage in observation, examination, investigation. We can interchange some of these words a little bit, but the idea is that there's no such thing as pure neutrality, there's no such thing as pure objectivity, that we are always going to be biased by all the baggage that we bring to the literature or to investigation or to inquiry. And I think that holds. I could make a categorical claim about that. I think that there are few, if anything, in the world that we would be able to investigate or examine without being mindful of all of our background beliefs that we bring to bear on that observation. So that's a statement that I'm very committed to. But let me say this. So we are having conversations about sort of how best to interpret the sacred literature. What I have to say is this, is just to help us construct or to think soundly about some premises that we may need to argue for in support of certain positions. This is a non-exhaustive list. This is like the world from Adam's POV, from where I see it. These are just some things. I've been sorting laundry this morning. It's a chore day. And so I've been thinking about this a little bit while sorting laundry, but I haven't put pen to paper on this. I've not taken much care to compose my thoughts carefully. This may turn into, in fact, a blog post, in which case I would compose and rehearse my thoughts more carefully. But this is a little bit off the cuff right now, but it is from the source of thinking critically about this for a long time. So here's what I'm thinking about, is that if we are thinking about certain ways to approach the biblical literature and approaching it in close connection to the divine or to the Holy One or to God, however we Adonai, Allah, however we may characterize the names for God, thinking about a deity. Okay, that's if there's a deity that is informing, inspiring, breathing into the text. Then I really want to just think some about the premises. So I'm not seeking to argue for any certain position. I'm not seeking to say we ought to or ought not to do these things. These are just the things that seem to me to be the premises that we must be mindful of. The first is the existence of the deity. And it just seems to me to be the case that to argue for the existence of the deity by appeal to sacred literature does run us into some concerns about circular arguments. Again, I'm not saying that is a showstopper. I'm just saying that it seems to me to be the case that arguing for the existence of a deity will require some philosophical argumentation, generating a philosophical argument for the deity's existence. Now, a way around that might be something akin to knowledge first epistemology. This has been Timothy Williamson is a big champion for this. So you can go and Google this. If you're interested, I'm always trying to name drop names where you can learn more. Timothy Williamson, knowledge first epistemology. So Timothy Williamson's program is like, let's stop. Historically, philosophers have said that knowledge, what it means to know something, is a greater epistemic commitment than merely to believe something. So historically, you have belief and then you add things to it to produce knowledge. Justification, truth, and belief, the justified true belief account, a JTB account of knowledge. There seems to be a fourth factor that's missing. Now, we could talk about Gettier cases and things like this, but this is very philosophical inside baseball. What I'm trying to get across here is that Timothy Williamson says, well, let's just take knowledge as theoretically fundamental and begin with knowledge and move from there. So that's a way that you could say with respect to theism or something, with the existence of a deity. We could just be like, theist first epistemology. You say, no, I'm just going to take it as a fundamental that God exists, and then we're going to argue from there. So that could be potentially a way around, producing philosophical argumentation in support of a deity. But long story short, first, to argue that there is a connection between the deity and the sacred text, then one of the premises will be arguing that the deity exists. Okay, so that's a premise that we need to take on board. To think about the interaction of that deity with the text, then we're left with, Descartes was thinking some about this, that there's an immaterial world, a not material world, essentially, and then there's the material world. So Descartes was trying to figure out how do you get the immaterial into having a cause for action of the material. If the immaterial, and he was thinking about it in terms of a soul or consciousness or something like that, was an immaterial thing, but it does direct our actions, Descartes thought. So that you've got to be committed to your soul or your consciousness or something to motivate your actions. You've got to somehow get the immaterial interacting with the material in some way. So that might be a premise that we need to work out. The other idea might be that, okay, we're treating the ancient literature of the Bible or the biblical literature. Of course, it's not just one book, it's a collection of many books. And that is a premise that would need to be argued for, okay? So, multivocality versus univocality, thinking about a source critical approach, that's a presupposition that I bring to my argumentation. I am in support of a source critical analysis. Yes, I'm a neo-documentarian. I'm into talking about the two-source hypothesis as an answer to the synoptic problem or things like this. So I'm a source critical person. And so that's a presupposition that I have. And those would be premises that I would need to argue for if I were motivating an argument. But we've got the premise that the deity exists. And then the next premise is like, well, how do you get the immaterial to interact with the material? So that'd be something we'd need to work out in some ways. And then if the Bible is inspired by the deity, then we need another premise to argue that we're treating the ancient literature of the Bible differently than other ancient literature. So we'd need to argue that the biblical literature is sui generis in some way, that it's in its own category, its own class, that would distinguish it from other ancient literature, so that we would treat the Bible differently, for example, than the way that we would treat Ugaritic texts or something like that. I'm just trying to say this would be a premise. I'm not arguing for it or against it. I'm just saying a premise in the argument would need to be defining the biblical literature as a sui generis class, distinct from other ancient literature from a similar time period, would just need to be a premise that we would need to argue in support of. So these seem to be clear premises that we need to argue on behalf of the deity exists. The deity is a material or immaterial thing, and if immaterial, would then need to interact with the material world in some way, because it seems plainly to be the case that should the deity exist, then that's some sort of immaterial existence, whereas the Bible feels like something that is a material thing that I can hold and see and observe and read, and here it is. I suppose that you could make the argument, if you're coming from a Christian tradition, that God is incarnate in Jesus and Jesus had a corporeal body, so there's something material there, but there's still like immateriality interacting with corporeality or materiality. It just seems to be a premise that's out there. So we've got the existence of the deity, the relational work between the immaterial and the material, that the ancient literature itself is in a sui generis class that is distinct from other ancient literature. These just simply seem to me to be the things that we need to argue for. Now, I'm not saying that you can or cannot argue for those things, but if we're talking about presuppositions and what we bring to bear on the biblical literature, those seem to be premises that need to exist in the offing as we try to understand how a text may be divinely inspired. And what authority that may or may not confer onto the literature. So I hope that's a little bit helpful to define some of my presuppositions and some of my thinking on this. Again, this isn't to argue for or against any positions. I'm good with whichever way the arguments go. Philosophers love arguments. And I'm viewing this video right now through that philosophical lens that is my background training. So at any rate, I can't make short videos. There's 10 minutes on this, but just some of my thoughts. And that I think is relevant to the discussion that many of us are having around dogmatism and data right now on this app. It's Saturday morning. I got more laundry to do. I hope you have a great day today. For those who celebrate Shana Tova, have a great 5784. Much love, peace out, and blade up.